And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Whew, what a game. 1989, Dawn of Freedom. Now this game is a game that's based on the revolutions that happened in Eastern Europe in, well, the year 1989. It's based on a very popular game called Twilight Struggle. Twilight Struggle is one of my favorite games. Here comes its little brother or big brother, I don't know. I mean, I would say they're pretty much the same weight. Now, I was originally going to do two videos on 1989. One for people who were new to the genre and one for people who've played Twilight Struggle. But I'm just going to kind of combine them together. I'm going to show you, I'm not going to show you how the whole game works. I'm going to show you mostly the differences between this and Twilight Struggle. But, well, let's get into it and then we'll come right back. Now the board is sticking out the table here because I wanted to show you it from the correct way. But here's a board that's showing you Eastern Europe. You can see up here you have East Germany, you have Poland, you have Hungary, you have the Czech Republic, you have Romania, and you have Bulgaria. And each of these spots has different cities or religious institutions or political institutions that are connected. And let's take a closer look at them. You can see there, for example, and wow, I'm not going to pronounce these names correctly, but you can see the university here, and it has two sides. And the reason for that is as the game progresses, you're going to be putting influence on the different sides. And whoever has more influence can control it, but you have to have at least that much more influence than the other person. So for example here, if the Democratic player has more influence than the Communist player, by one, which is all he needs, he'll turn it over here to the dark side to show that he controls that side. While over here, in Szezged, or wow, I'm going to get yelled at for that one. If the Communist player has 6 and the Democratic player has 1, he has at least 4 more, which is what he needs to control that area. But above, the Democratic player has 3, and the Communist player here has 4. No one has control of that because the Communist player only has 1 and he needs 3. Now those have different colors because these are called battleground areas. They are the most important places to control, but there are different areas to control, and each area also is a different type, and that's shown by the different symbols that are on the cards. The different types will have effect during what we call a power struggle, and they will allow you to play different cards. Now, the whole game is about victory points, but a little bit differently. There's one victory point track down here at the bottom, and as victory points are gained or lost, if they ever get all the way down here where there's minus 20, then the Communist player wins, while if they get all the way up here to 20, the Democratic player wins. Otherwise, at the end of the game, whoever has the most points wins. However, at the end of the game, the Communist player is going to have a bit of an advantage because every country that he still controls, and he controls all countries at the beginning of the game, will get him a scoring bonus, so you have to be careful not to allow him to have too many points at the end of the game or control too many countries. Now, I'm not going to be able to explain everything about this game, but hopefully I can give you a brief idea of how a turn works. To do that, we're going to need to take a look at some cards that are in the game. There are 3 decks of cards. These say early year. Those are used in the first 3 turns, and then in the 4, 5, 6, and 7, we'll add middle year cards to the deck, and then in the last 3 turns of the game, we'll add late year. Of course, the game may not even take that long, but who knows. Now, each of these cards, they all have different events and pictures of things that happen during the course of the game. But the most important thing is the number up in the top. That's operation points. You're going to deal these cards out to each player. And we're going to take turns back and forth. The Communist player goes first, and each player is going to take 7 actions on each turn. And you're going to play cards from your hand. Now, when you play a card from your hand, you can play it for either these operation points, or you can play it for the headline or the event that's on the card. Now, the headline on the card is going to help one of the players, sometimes tremendously. It might help the Communist player if it's the red star. It might help the Democratic player if it's a blue star. And there's a few, not many actually, but there are a few neutral stars that can help any player, whichever one happens to play the card. Now, one of the interesting things about this game is that when you play a card that shows your opponent's event, you can't play their event, of course. You wouldn't even want to. You would want to play the operation points instead on the card. However, you have to play their event. That's the rule. So it's a pain when you get your opponent's cards because you don't want to play them. They might have a lot of operations points. This one only has one. But let's say you're a Democratic player and you got this one. That's 4 operations points. That's great. But then you have to play this event. Now, you can do your operations point and let them do the event second, or you can have them do the event first. It's up to you. And a lot of these events, in fact, most of them have a little asterisks after them, which means after the event has been played, that card is removed from the game. Now, what are operation points used for? Well, for that we come to the map. Operation points, you can simply add more influence for your side to any place that's adjacent to one of your ones already. And there's little black lines that show adjacency. And you'll start with these at the beginning of the game, and different events will add more influence. So that's one way to add adjacency all over the place. However, there's a thing called support checks, and this is where you have a die. And to have a support check, your opponent needs to have influence in an area. So let's say I wanted to make a support check here in, man, I'm never going to say it right, so we're just going to do it in the university. So the communist player wants to make a support check in a university. So he needs to roll more than double the stability number there, which is a 1. So he needs to roll more than a 2. Well, that's easy enough. And we look at the card that the communist player has played. He's played a 2 here. Well, and so he's going to roll a die. Ooh, he rolled a 6. Fantastic. 6 plus 2 is 8. 8 minus 2 is 6. So the difference is 6. So the Democratic player is going to lose 2. And then I'm going to gain 4 more in that area. Now, that is not so handy, really. If you played Twilight Struggle, this is kind of a mix between the coups and the realignment rolls. But when I said that wasn't so handy, what I meant was there was really no reason for me to do a huge realignment roll there, or waste a good card on that area. It's better to do a realignment roll in these areas, but that is another thing you can do. Another thing you can do is you can go down here to the Tiananmen Square track. And this will give benefits to the people who are ahead on the Tiananmen Square track. And each player is going to have a token that they're moving ahead on this Tiananmen Square track. And you can discard a card, and then you try to roll, adding the number on that card to your die, and you try to match this number, which you can see is different for each of the players, although the bonuses are the same. The cool thing about the Tiananmen Square track is that when you use a card there, and it's your opponent's card, the event doesn't trigger. So this is a spot where you can throw away one of your cards. So one of the gritting, difficult decisions of the game is deciding which card to throw away on this track, because you can't do it for all of them. You can also keep a card from round to round that you don't use, but still, that's a really tough decision. Now, in their deck, there are what we call scoring cards. Now, when you get a scoring card, you have to play it at some point during your turn. And for example, here is a Hungary scoring card. When a scoring card happens, before we score the region, there's going to be a power struggle in that region, because we're going to see if the Democrats are going to take the region over and it's become a democracy, or if it will stay a communist country. And when that happens, each player is going to draw from this power struggle deck a certain amount of cards, depending on how many areas they control in that region. And so they're going to draw a bunch of cards. And once they get these cards, these players are going to take turns back and forth playing a card. Like, for example, here I can play a March card. Then my opponent must also play a March card. If they can't, I've won. If they can play a March card, though, then they roll a die, and they're trying to roll a number that's equal to or higher than the card I just played. If they do so, they have initiative, and then they can start playing cards. Otherwise, I can keep playing cards. Now, there are wild cards in the deck that match anything, but even more importantly, there are different leaders. For example, here's a student leader. And a student leader, if you control, for example, the university in a region, you can play the student leader as a wild. If you don't, though, then when you get him, he's worthless to you. And there's other things you can do. You can ante up. You can get rid of 2 of your cards to make it more valuable. And, I'll let you play the game to figure that out. But basically, you're going to go back and forth with these cards, and eventually someone's going to win. When someone wins, you will then roll on this power struggle results table to see how much support they lose from that country. And it's possible, and you'll get victory points for winning the country, and then it's possible on a roll 4, 5, 6, or 7, for if the Democrats win, that the country will no longer be a communist country, at which point it doesn't have, that scoring card's removed from the game, and you guys won't be fighting over that country anymore. You can still put support in it, It can still have effects on the rest of the place, and we'll do scoring checks for some of these countries at the end of the game. But for the most part, if Hungary is scored and the Democrats win, then Hungary isn't nearly as big of a player over the course of the game any longer. And then you'll score points depending on how many are you in there. Do you have presence? Do you have domination, which means you control more areas and you control more of the battleground regions? And do you have control, which means you pretty much control everything? And then you also get an extra point for every battleground region you have. And so that's going back and forth. Now, I know people who've played this game are probably saying, but you missed this detail, you missed this detail. You're right. I can't hit everything in this review because there's a lot going on. But in essence, there's 10 turns. You'll be drawing cards each turn. You're trying to control the different regions, go back and forth, use your operation points and or these events, which are very different and very historical and all kinds of things. They can do crazy things, add influence in spots you wouldn't believe, take control of a region. Knowing the card deck will obviously give you an advantage in the game. But that is, in essence, a very brief summary of 1989 Dawn of Freedom. Okay, 1989 is very similar to Twilight Struggle, and yet very different. So let's do some comparing and contrasting, and in that you'll see, if you're someone new, I think, you can see whether you should get one or the other. If you like deeply strategic, wholly charged thematic games, games that teach you as well as remind you about history, games that give you lots of choices and yet follow a very fairly historical track, games that do highly promote strategic and where the player who has played more often will likely pound someone who's played less but gives you a chance, has luck, then you will like both of these games. Okay? Now, let's talk about their difference. For theme, Twilight Struggle wins. Sorry. I always have Twilight Imperium on the brain. Twilight Struggle wins for theme purposes. However, I learned a lot playing 1989. I like Twilight Struggle better because many of those events, I know, they're all big world-shaking events, things that happen all over the globe. Okay, you can argue at 1989, but I didn't know a lot of these people in there. And while I can be gung-ho American or make fun being a communist in Twilight Struggle, it's you know, I did live through 1989, and I certainly remember a lot of these events happening, but I wasn't there. I was in high school and was really not paying as much attention to this as I should have been. That being said, I think students of history are going to love both themes. So for theme, I'm giving it to Twilight Imperium, but barely. For gameplay and strategy, I'd say they're pretty much the same. They're very different feel. In Twilight Struggle, there's just this back and forth, back and forth. In 1989, the communist player is just trying to hang on. He's going to lose these countries to democracy. He must hold on to them as long as possible. And so there's a very different feel. And also some parts of the world, they don't get shut down, but they essentially aren't as useful as the game progresses. And so your attention shifts. Your attention also shifts in Twilight Struggle, but it can go back and forth, while in 1989 it's a little bit more linear. The space race track in Twilight Imperium and Tiananmen Square, I understand that they tied to Tiananmen Square a little, you know, it makes sense, but I like the space race a little better. It just seems cooler. The card composition, I think 1989 has the advantage there because there's a whole lot more events that could pulled out of the game, so you have to constantly think, I can play this great event, then that will then get taken out of the game and I won't have that card to use anymore. And so what you're trying to do in 1989 is play as few of your events as possible so that your opponent will play them on his turn, which gives you the event anyway. I very much like how they got ideology and religion and printing presses into this game and managed to put them on a map and make it work. The whole phase, the power struggle phase, that took me a bit to warm up to. Now, I've seen this kind of combat before. I know it's a We the People type combat. I played it one time in Hannibal Rome vs. Carthage used combat that, if I recall correctly, was very similar to this. And at first I was like, but as gameplay went by, I realized the more of these cards you have and the different things you control really affect this. You control the elite, there's more cards. I went through and looked at all the cards in the deck. For both games, if you play the game again, like I said, you have an advantage over someone else because you know what's in the deck. Both games leave me with a hunger to play them again because you're like, oh wow, that could have happened and this could have happened. And both sides are different in how they feel. So we're here to talk about 1989. So we'll leave Twilight Struggle alone. Great game, but let's talk about 1989 now. Fantastic game. This is one of the few games that actually is being added to my collection. I'm going to hang on to this one. You know, I could have Jones theoried it, the Twilight Struggle. You only keep one of a game of a certain type is his theory, but they feel very different, and they're both good. And I wouldn't mind seeing a third game in this series, and so on and so forth. I think this is a strong, solid system, and I'm not a war gamer, but this is a system that I can really embrace and enjoy. So major props to 1989.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at dicetower.com. You can also find the latest board game news at dicetowernews.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Fun Again Games, the world's best game source. Fun Again Games has over 5,000 games available. Check them out at funagain.com.